Sticky pads on your saxophone can really drive you crazy, but they're pretty easy to fix. And in fact, if you stick around in this video, stick around. We're going to talk about 3 ways that you can fix a sticky pad super quick. G'day, Nigel here from Sax School. Well, today we're going to talk about a issue that every saxophone player on the face of the earth has had at some point. This is sticking pads. It can be something that happens every now and then, or it could be something that happens every single time that you pick up your saxophone. Either way, it does drive you crazy, but it's a pretty easy thing to fix. So we're going to talk about some strategies to overcome that, and also some tips that'll help you to avoid having that problem. And to help me with this, I've got my mate Steve Crow, master saxophone repairer, who's actually, Steve looks after all my saxophones, and I think he's an amazing repairer. If you live in England, he's the guy that you should be talking to about saxophone repair. And you know, this sticky pad thing is something we've talked about a fair bit in my sax school community at McGillmusic.com. There's thousands of people learning saxophone in there every day, and I know that it's an issue that they have because they talk to me about it. So, Steve,
yep.
We'll talk in a minute about how you can avoid having sticky pads, but what are the best ways to approach fixing a sticky pad if you've got one? I know on my saxophone there's ones that stick most commonly. Which ones do you find?
Usually low C sharp, E flat, G sharp and this key.
It's an interesting thing to mention too that often, particularly if you're relatively new to saxophone, it can be one of those things where you pick up your saxophone and you start playing and stuff just doesn't sound right. It could be a note doesn't sound right, or the saxophone doesn't behave normally. And it's not apparent when you look at it what the problem is, but that's often what the cause is, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's usually saliva that's the sugar in the saliva, or what if you've been drinking Coca-Cola or beer or eating, and the sugar, the water goes down the instrument. It's got to settle on the pads, and the sugar in the water then becomes sticky. And even if you just drink water, sometimes you can be. Depends what kind of saliva you have. You can have. I can play an instrument and maybe the pads won't stick for me, but they will for you, or vice versa.
Yeah.
And then it's just a matter of locating the pad and then addressing the pad, cleaning it.
Okay, so let's say we've identified that our, what do you reckon, the C sharp key or something
C-sharp,
is sticky.
Yep.
What can we do to make it unsticky?
Okay. Well, the first thing is there are things on the market. There are like chalk paper that's available, and I don't particularly like those because it leaves a residue on the pad, and then it emulsifies. It builds up. There's this chalk, and then when you service the instrument and take it to pieces, the whole of the internals they're coated with this emulsified.
Oh, that's
chalk.
Interesting. So you're talking about that paper you can buy that's got chalk on it.
Yeah.
Because you can also buy like I've seen somewhere like a chalk powder, and I've heard people talk about putting chalk powder on. I bet you have the same problem with that, right?
Yeah. Initially, it gets the pad working properly, so you can get through the gig. But it's not really. It won't destroy your instrument, but it's not nice as a repairer when you start to strip it down and service it.
Yeah, that's a good top tip. Okay, so if we're not having to use that, then what can we use?
Well, I use normally a piece of paper, and I would put a piece of this is normal A4 printing paper, or you could use a teal roll, or you could use a £20 note. Or
a pound note, really? Yeah. Or a till roll, so you mean like a receipt?
Yeah.
Oh,
something that's quite difficult to split, so you don't want something that's going to just break up and then obviously fall inside the saxophone. You want it to be pretty rigid.
Yep.
A little bit of strength there.
Yeah.
And then I would open the pad and just slide the paper in between the tone hole and the pad.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
And then just lightly press on top of the pad and pull the paper out, and you'll find that there will be a residue. There's a faint green line around there where it's actually picked up the saliva or the build-up on the tone hole, but it will do both. It'll pick it up from the pad and the tone hole, and then it won't stick anymore for a good while.
Oh wow, so I mean it's pretty simple really. So yeah. By sticking the paper in between the pad and the tone hole and then pulling it out, it's basically wiping off the tone hole and it's wiping off the pad.
The other way you could do this is you could use an earbud. just a normal.
Or like a Q-tip.
Yeah, whatever you want to call them. Yeah. But what I will probably do is use some water, whether it be lukewarm water or cold, it doesn't matter, and just wet one end. I'm just going to run the earbud round the impression of the pad, and then I'm going to run the earbud round the top of the tone hole. Because we've used the paper, there's not much come off there. But if I let's maybe pick on another one really quickly. G sharp.
G sharp, yeah.
So round the leather of the pad of the impression, and then round the tone hole. And if you're just careful, then you're not going to damage anything. And if you look carefully there now,
it's picked up quite a lot of stuff, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting, and that's literally just a Q-tip or a cotton bud and some water, but wiping it out. I mean, the great thing about that is it's easy to get hold of a cotton bud or a Q-tip. You can have it in your saxophone case, and you can easily get hold of some water, and also it's not going to leave anything inside your saxophone, which is important.
That's right. Yeah.
Cool. All right, so paper or a Q-tip, those are two really easy tips. And would you reckon that, I mean, that's the only way that I've ever fixed a sticky pad. That should fix just about any sticky pad, don't you think?
Yeah, within reason, yeah.
Cool. I mean, that's awesome. I think even as a general maintenance thing, it's not a bad idea to get yourself a Q-tip and go around and clean your pads from time to time. I also did say that I was going to give you some advice on how to avoid having sticky pads, and Steve kind of stole my thunder there a little bit, because what I was going to say, which is something that I see students do all the time, I see pro players do it all the time, and that is eating or drinking while you're playing. Really, it's a big no-no. I mean, just from a hygiene level, it's not a good idea, but also it's gonna make your pads stick. So if you like to have a beer or a soft drink or even coffee or tea with sugar in it while you're playing, all of that is eventually going to end up on your pads, and you are going to have a problem with sticky pads. So the best strategy is to avoid eating or drinking while you're playing a saxophone, or if you can't do that, just wash your mouth out with some water before you do some playing, and then you're going to avoid that problem altogether.
Yeah.
Great. And you're going to make repairers like Steve much happier, because when he goes to overhaul your saxophone, he's not going to have to spend half a day cleaning out all that gunk out of the inside of your saxophone. I hope you found that useful. If you've had a sticky pad, let us know below which note sticks most on your saxophone, or if you've got a way that you fix sticky pads that we haven't talked about today that you'd like to share, let us know in a comment, because I'd love to know. Also, if you've got something about repairing saxophones that you'd like to get some help with, then let me know that in a comment or send me an email, because we're going to be making some more of these videos, and maybe we can answer your question in a future video. So if you want to find out more about Steve Crow, check out the link below this video. If you live in England, Steve's the guy to talk to, and you should look him up on the internet as well, because we need to talk about this actually at some point, Steve. Steve does some really clever things with converting saxophones. Cons, you're an expert on old saxophones too, aren't you?
Yes, so just rebuilding, re-engineering the keywork. On vintage Selmers.
Vintage Selmers, and cons and all sorts of stuff. Yeah. So you can find out more about Steve in the link below. If you want to get some help with learning saxophone, check out McGillmusic.com. We have a 30-day trial going at the moment where you can join thousands of other people around the world that use those lessons every day to develop their skills. There's loads of courses in there and specific lessons as well. And if it's your first time here, make sure you do click subscribe, because we're making new videos all the time, and that way you'll get notified when the new videos come out. And they're going to help you, hopefully, to have some fun and learn a bit more about saxophone. Keep practicing hard, and catch you next time.